Hey guys, this is Sports with Dylan. Today there was quite a few less free agent signings than there was yesterday, but there's still a couple notable signings in which I will talk about in this video. The biggest move of today didn't actually happen today. It happened last night once I was done publishing my last video. That was late. I was shocked. Why? And it's 3 hours later in New Jersey, so whose idea was it to sign Ondrej Palat in the middle of the night there? But anyways, the New Jersey Devils have signed Ondrej Palat. I believe this is kind of a move to recuperate after losing out on Johnny Gaudreau. Palat hasn't really shown what he can do, truly. He's shown he can be a solid player, but when you've got so many players on your roster, just look at the offensive players on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Kush, you got Stamkos, you got Point, you've got even Anthony Cirelli was ahead of him, so you've got quite a few players to compete with. So even if he's shown he's a solid player, he's never shown his true potential because he's had so many other players that are the ones scoring the goals. So I think this was a good pickup by New Jersey. I think he has so much more in the tank, even though he is 30. So I think we will finally get to see what Ondrej Palat can truly do. And New Jersey can use that boost. I don't think New Jersey is going to make the playoffs this year. I think they're a couple steps behind. But let's keep in mind here that 3 teams need to make it from that division. Carolina and New York Rangers are already pretty much locked in. But besides that, like I mentioned in yesterday's video, which I'll leave a link to in the description, you've got one more team. Could be the Washington Capitals, but I'm not so sure given that the age and the injuries with Nicholas Backstrom's the big one. Pittsburgh Penguins, that's probably my best bet, even though they're getting up there in age as well, and getting injuries. Then you've got the Columbus Blue Jackets, with now Patrick Laine and Johnny Gaudreau on one team. That could get pretty interesting, but besides that, the rest of the roster is light years behind them. Then you've got the Devils, that are coming out of a rebuild. They're still kind of in the midst of it, but they're coming out of it slowly, so I think they could contend for that playoff spot. And then after that, you've got the New York Islanders, who also missed out on Gaudreau, and seemingly have everything in shambles. They have some good players, Josh Bailey, Matthew Barzal, and you've got some good young players to rely on in the future. But for now, you don't have any superstars on your team. And then you've got the Philadelphia Flyers, who are also kind of a mess, with no real good players. Just like the New York Islanders, except they don't even have a couple veterans they can rely on. Like, Owen Tippett's probably their best player by a lot. And it's a Tortorella coach team, so they might have success the next couple years, but we'll see. Anyways, my point is, the New Jersey Devils, with a couple extra pieces, could be making the playoffs. So I think this was a smart move to bring on Palat, who could be that boost they need to make it to the playoffs. Next up, there's both a signing and a trade that I'm kind of sad about, given that the Oilers were pursuing both of these players. Connor Brown and Dylan Strome are now on the Washington Capitals, and that just hurts me so much, because the Oilers were so close to getting both of them. Not both, but one or the other, and yet somehow the Capitals stole both from them? That is just unfair. Both of them played with Connor McDavid at one point. So it would have been a really fun matchup to see them together again. But after all that, the Capitals took both. I mean, come on, dude. But at the same time, I get the move from the Capitals' perspective. They're young players. They've got plenty of potential. And they're solid players as well. I mean, they're not superstars yet. But Dylan Strome especially, I think, has tons of potential and could become the next great player on the Washington Capitals. Maybe not quite Ovechkin, but I think he could be pretty good. And I think Connor Brown's in the same position. Neither of them have been on great teams, but now that they're on the Capitals with a winning culture, I think they'll have more success. And it makes sense. The Capitals are very old teams, so they've got to bring in those young guys to keep the movement on. They got to keep the Capitals' reign alive once Ovechkin retires, Backstrom retires, Oshie retires. Even Tom Wilson's getting up there in age. So, it makes sense to bring on these guys. I'm still kind of disappointed. Another move about a player that's not exactly notable, but it's still an interesting move. Josh Levo was signed by the St. Louis Blues. This makes a bit of sense because he's kind of a third-line player. They got him really cheap, so good on the Blues for that contract. And they could use a solid third-line player, which Levo is. Now, he's more expensive than plenty of third-line players, but he's a solid third-line player. He can even be brought up if necessary. So I think this was a good move by the Blues. They're getting up there in age, not quite Capitals up there in age, but they're getting up there in age, so it makes sense to bring in a couple younger guys. So if their older players do get injured, they've got someone to carry the fort for now. The last move I'm going to talk about today is that Jordie Benn was signed by the Toronto Maple Leafs. Jordie Benn, for those of you that don't know, is the older brother of Stars star. That didn't exactly make sense, but Dallas Stars superstar, that makes more sense when I say it like that, Jamie Benn. Now, I think Toronto has done a very good job this offseason at truly realizing what they need to do. They're not pursuing players that aren't coming back, sort of like the Flames were doing. We don't know the Gaudreau situation exactly, but it seemed like Gaudreau said he wanted out many times before. So it seemed like the battle's already lost by the Flames. And I think the Maple Leafs were in the same position with Ilya Mikheyev and Jack Campbell. Both of them were pretty much destined to leave, especially by the start of free agency. But I think the Toronto Maple Leafs have done an amazing job, just outstanding job at realizing that those players are gone. They're not pursuing them. Instead, they go for other players that can fill the void. Just like the Jack Campbell thing. They go and say, okay, he's gone. But Matt Murray, he used to be a solid goalie. If we can bring him in for cheap, then now we've got a potential starter. And then, hey, Samsonov's a free agent, and he's a solid goalie. He hasn't been great, but he's been pretty good. So we can bring him in as well. And now they've got two solid goalies competing for the starting job. So I think Toronto's realized what they need to do to still keep that roster in very good contention. And Mikheyev, they don't really need him. He was a good player, a really good player, but they have plenty of players on that offense. So instead they go, okay, fine, he's probably gone, so let's not focus on him. Let's focus on the defense, where we still have a couple of holes. Let's go sign Jordie Benn. He would pair great with Mark Giordano, and that's what they did. So I applaud the Toronto Maple Leafs quite a bit for what they've done this offseason in realizing that they can't sign the most expensive players. There is such thing as a salary cap, but they can bring in players that might produce just as well, cheaper. Jack Campbell was actually in the same position just a year ago. He was a fine backup to Frederik Andersen, especially when Frederik Andersen kept getting injured, but he's never amazing. But that's when the Maple Leafs went, screw it, Frederik Andersen keeps getting injured, let's just try this Jack Campbell guy. And he played great for the Maple Leafs. And Matt Murray or Ilya Samsonov could play just as well, because the Maple Leafs are good at developing players into what they want them to be. You could argue that Jack Campbell's more of a system player than anything. I think he played extremely well, and I hope he does that on the Oilers. But you got to credit some of that to the Maple Leafs organization for developing him into what he was. He's never great on the Kings, but as soon as the Maple Leafs were willing to give him an opportunity and then gave him the starting role, then bam, he's a really good player. So I gotta just applaud the Toronto Maple Leafs for that. Aside from that, haven't really had any major signings today. Klingberg and Kadri are the two biggest free agents still in the market by far. And we'll see. It's possible that both of them go to Calgary. It honestly is. And it would make sense because Calgary now has cap space. because Goudreau's gone. So why not bring in a couple of players that can help fill the void? Now, I know that Klingberg is on defense, but they still have a couple holes on defense. So I think that would be awesome for Calgary if they managed to bring in Kadri and Klingberg. But we'll have to see. For now, thanks for watching.